In practicing this path, we begin with Shamata practice because we recognize that Shamata is the foundation for all of the higher realizations of Buddhism, the realizations that actually have the power to transform our view of reality. And then we are practicing this particular type of shamatha, which actually uses mental appearances to develop the stability and vividness of shamatha, because it is really beginning to take the fruition as the path. So this is this is why you could say Dzogchen is the highest of all tantras, and because it is using the ultimate nature of the mind as a way of reaching the ultimate nature of the mind, and our view of the ultimate nature of the mind to develop the stability and vividness of shamatha. So we practice shamatha using appearances to develop stability and vividness. And then, while we are practicing shamatha, we practice enough vipassana so that we are not drawn away to these appearances, that if we mistake them to be external appearances, they have the power to capture us. They have the power to cause mental afflictions, because we give them that power by the power of delusion. And so we use enough vipassana practice so that we can actually watch these appearances as they are arising as a shamatha practice, but we know these appearances for exactly what they are. They are dream appearances. And then, so as we are practicing this integration of shamatha and vipassana, we then are moving closer and closer to the genuine experience of cutting through to pristine awareness. And so this is how then that we use not only this vipassana practice of Wangchuk Dorji, the ninth karmapa, to cut through to pristine awareness, but this is also a very clear description of the view of the great perfection, of exactly how reality appears to us as we are resting in pristine awareness. And that will become more clear to us this afternoon when we get into the section on identifying Rigpa. But we still have a little more work to do in cutting through to pristine awareness. So we began our vipassana practice with these 4 points of Wangchuk Dorje. Now, all objective appearances are like water and waves. All are apparitions of the mind, and in reality are unestablished. By realizing this, one recognizes all appearances as the mind. So this is what we are trying to do as we are resting in simultaneous stillness and motion. If we are resting in that very balanced state of lucid dreaming in the waking state, then we are going to see these appearances actually in the moment that they arise. And we will see them come into existence. And then we will be with them while they are present. And then we will see them dissolve again back into the space of the mind from which they arose. And so our object of mindfulness, while we are resting in this simultaneous stillness and motion, the stillness of awareness in which appearances arise as movement within the spaciousness of awareness, because we are aware of the space of the mind, these appearances that arise within the space of the mind are very clearly nothing but mental appearances. So we are not seduced by them, we are not deluded by them into thinking that these are somehow truly existent external objects. These are not appearances of something that is truly inherently existent. These are simply mental appearances. And so it is very easy in this approach to shamatha, as we are maintaining simultaneous stillness and motion, to recognize this very first powerful point of Wangchuk Dorje's Vipassana. It doesn't require analysis. It just requires observation. You can see it, and it has the power of truth to you because it is your experience. And this becomes more and more powerful as experience the more that you do this practice. And then Wangchuk Dorje continues, by analyzing the essence of the mind in terms of going, staying, and arising, it turns out not to be established as anything. So like horses and elephants in a dream, it is unestablished in reality. By realizing this, one recognizes that the mind is empty. And this one requires more analysis when we are first engaging with the practice. But then we can do the fusion of shamatha and vipassana in a couple of ways that we don't have time to go into in this retreat, called seeking out the source of names, where you try to observe with your power of shamatha whether you can find the object that you are looking for. Let's just say I, the sense of I, can I find it in all of these mental appearances that are arising? So this is the way that you would go about discovering that, one of the points for discovering that the mind is empty. Am I my mind? Well, what comes to mind when I say these words, I, and then that is the object that I am looking for. What this sense of I that I have. And as Lama Yeshe says in his book on Mahamudra, what we are really looking for is this sense of I that is eternal, that is an independent, autonomous essence of me that exists prior to and independent of conceptual designation. So something that is not just simply a dependent origination, but something that is more like a soul. And this soul is with me from the moment I am born to the moment I die. And it is this soul who just is kind of a continuous experiencer of all of my experience. And so there is one I that was with me when I was very young and had all of the experiences of a child. But it feels like when I look back at that I who experienced the experiences of a child, it feels like the same I as now. And there are powerful meditations for really bringing that right up into our observation so that once we identify it, we can easily refute it. But so this is the sense of I, this independent, autonomous essence of I, and we can just examine as these appearances are arising while we're resting in simultaneous stillness and motion. Can I find I in the bases of designation? Because I designate I upon these mental appearances. But can I find I in any of these appearances? And in fact, then a very important point is, are these appearances inherently a basis of designation of I? Or are they only a basis of designation for I when I designate I upon them? Otherwise, they are just mere appearances, not unrelated to I, until the moment I call a clay pot a clay pot. So this is, part of the way that you can, and there are other approaches also, that you can begin to use your shamatha practice of resting in stillness and motion to discover the mind is empty, meaning that that doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but it answers the question, how does it exist? It exists not as this independent, autonomous essence of me that exists across time, but it is simply something that comes into existence moment to moment, and it is based, like all appearances, on these two elements. First of all, it is klishtimanas, I am, this tearing of reality into two parts, the first being a subject and the other being the object. So klishtimanas, which is the source of samsaric reality or samsaric appearances, is really exactly what is causing even this sense of I am to arise. So we recognize then that mind is empty. There is no inherent existence. That mind exists as, like every other appearance, dependent upon klishtimanas, the sense of I am, and the second contributing condition being conceptualization. So mind, as Nagarjuna said, is a mere label. And this mere label is pasted onto or projected onto different elements. A powerful emotion arises, and I label that as me. I identify with it as me. This becomes, for me, who I am, is this particular emotion. It comes up over and over and over again, and for me, this becomes the sense of who I am. So we cut through basically these layers of delusion one by one, first of all to recognize that all of these appearances that are arising to me while I'm practicing shamatha are insubstantial, have no more concrete reality than a dream appearance. And then we realize that the mind, which seems to be over here, watching appearances arise over there in the space of the mind, that actually there is a non-duality between the appearances and the mind. So there are not two things, a subject mind over here who is aware of appearances even arising to the mind, but that this mind itself that seems so truly me, as the agent, the one who is making choices, who is willing, who is separate, who is navigating a path through life, making all decisions about who I am, who I want to be. That I, as the agent even, is illusory. I, even as the observer of reality, is also equally illusory, as an independent, autonomous essence that is not an irreducible me. So we find that then the mind is empty as well. And all of this can happen as appearances are arising to you. This is what we will emphasize this afternoon. That this begins when you actually cut through to pristine awareness. This is exactly how appearances are going to appear to you. They will appear to you as mind. Mind will appear to you as empty. And so there is no gap, basically, where you have to think, these are empty appearances. Mind is empty. This is just the way that appearances will arise to you. And then, so just to finish that thought, remember that Losang Chukyi Gyaltsen said that we don't have to fabricate an idea of independent, autonomous essence or inherent existence, the object to refute. We don't have to construct one intellectually. All we have to do is look at the way that ordinary appearances arise to us, because these, with the ordinary mind of a sentient being, every appearance that appears to us is going to be appearing as self-existent. But that is not their reality. And as soon as we cut through the mind of a sentient being to pristine awareness, then instead of appearances simply appearing to us as self-existent, now the appearances are going to appear to us as empty appearances, as only being mind, as having no tangible existence. And we approximate then that view to the best of our ability as the path to reaching that as a spontaneous experience. We reach the point where reality just looks that way to us by, first of all, taking these conscious steps with intention along the path. But the beauty of this path, for me, having practiced other paths of Buddhism, the genius of this path of Dzogchen and Mahamudra is that everything is so coherent. Everything that you practice leads to the ultimate goal. There is nothing that you have to discard or leave behind as you move along the path. And so your shamatha practice naturally is integrated with your vipassana practice. That naturally leads you to, you are taking the fruit as the path. And so when you actually get to the achievement, you have these glimpses of ultimate reality. You recognize them for exactly what they are because you are already well familiar with them. And then when it comes to the final test of your worldview at the time of death, then you are familiar with everything that is occurring to you as well. Because everything in the entire practice has led you to be successful when facing the ultimate test. So that's one of the reasons, or several of the reasons, that I enjoy this path and feel so confident, frankly, in this path, because it is so concentrated. There's nothing wasted in it. And it is all very empirical, all based on the observation of shamatha. But now back to the ninth karmapa, Wangchuk Dorje. So we first of all recognize as these appearances are arising to us, all appearances are mind, and then the mind itself is empty. And then he continues, from the state of emptiness, clarity and limpidity, in unceasing great joy, it spontaneously arises as manifold appearances, like the moon's reflection in water. By realizing this, one recognizes emptiness as spontaneous actualization. So this really gets to the heart, you could say, of the distinction between this approach of Dzogchen and Mahamudra on the one hand, and then the approach of the new translation schools, especially Sakya and Gelug approaches, to understanding both emptiness and Buddha nature. And so emptiness in this approach is not a sheer absence. It is not a simple negation or a complex negation. It is actually space. And space is not empty. Space is actually full of potential. So here's the paradox. Space is brimming with potentiality. It is the absolute space from which all appearances arise. And in fact, all appearances, it's said, are a temporary crystallization of this space. And so when we reach this point of resting in pristine awareness, what we recognize is that because as His Holiness the Dalai Lama is going to point out to us later this afternoon, another distinction between the old translation and new translation schools, a very fundamental and powerful difference that he points out, is that appearances don't stop when you're resting in clear light. When you're resting in ultimate reality, that doesn't mean there are no appearances. But now you recognize appearances for what they are, and because at that point you are resting beyond time, in the fourth time, beyond past, present, and future. So there is no causality that you can say. You are beyond karma, the actions of karma. And so cause and effect can't operate in the absence of past, present, and future. And so all of these appearances that arise are said to be spontaneous actualizations. And so this is what you recognize then in this third point of Wangchuk Dorje. All of these appearances that arise, as you are watching them, you see them as mind. Mind that is perceiving these appearances is empty, and the appearance then that is arising is none other than mind as a spontaneous actualization of mind itself, because mind and emptiness are two sides of the same coin. The luminosity, and this is something that will be pointed out again with great eloquence this afternoon by Yangtang Rinpoche, that the luminosity of the mind and the emptiness of the mind are non-dual. And so we begin to recognize that all of these appearances that arise are spontaneous actualizations of the space of mind, which is emptiness. And then he continues, just to wrap up these 4 points. Thus, from simple, spontaneous actualization, arising and release occur spontaneously, without wavering from immutable great bliss that is clear, empty, spontaneous, and free from elaboration, like a snake that unravels its own knots. By ascertaining this, the 4th point, one recognizes spontaneous actualization as self-liberating. So this is what in Dzogchen is termed as the self-release of appearances. So once these appearances spontaneously actualized, do they then become permanent, concrete objects of reality? They just remain as these temporary water bubbles that rise and are apparent in the realms of beings for a time, and then the water bubble bursts and becomes part of the water again. So the release, or I should say the arising, first of all, is spontaneous. And then the release is spontaneous also. And this is, again, something that you watch from your still awareness. These appearances that arise as mind, you watch them arise as spontaneous actualizations, because where did they come from? Did you call them into existence? Did you have to will this thought? Do you have any control over these thoughts that arise? Why are all of these thoughts so surprising when they come? Why do you have suddenly, while you're resting in Shamata practice, especially the more time that you spend in retreat, you may have a very clear memory of something that you haven't remembered for decades, something from childhood that is so fresh in high definition. It feels like it is newly created, but it is, that is a memory that has been in storage for a long time, but you weren't even aware of its existence any longer. So you have no control to bring that memory up to awareness now. At the 2-month retreat in Tosam Ling, one of the German participants remarked in an interview that we had that he was shocked by all of these appearances that surprised him one after another, that he had no idea even that they existed, but they were snippets of memory. And he said he had one that came to him of when he was on a motorcycle tour in India a few years earlier, of just going around a curve. And he remembered paying attention to going around that particular curve. And then, beyond that there was more road, and he had no idea that that was actually stored as a memory. And then while he was resting in Shamata, spontaneous actualization of that. So it's not, where do these appearances come from? We don't choose them. We don't will them. If we had that kind of control of our mind, all of us would be enlightened already. All of us would be happy. There would never be a moment of depression, of anxiety. But where do all of these thoughts come from? They are spontaneous actualizations, and that becomes very clear to us as we just watch these appearances arise. And then, if we don't grasp onto them, this is the key, because His Holiness said that the conceptual mind and the conceptualization of conceptual mind is not self-sustaining. It requires the engagement of mental consciousness to become fused with it in order to replicate itself. So when we grasp onto, and this is just a metaphorical term really, but I think it really captures the sense of what happens. We grasp onto it, we cling to it. And by clinging to it then, we keep it around. But if we don't do that, what do you notice as you are watching from still, spacious awareness? Appearances arise, appearances are present for some time, and then appearances self-release. They dissolve spontaneously again, back into the space of the mind from which they arose. So those are the 4 points that we can actually observe. So we can do all of this very powerful Vipassana practice while we're doing Shamata practice. And because we are recognizing these appearances as mind, doing the Vipassana practice, our Shamata practice becomes more and more stable, because these appearances don't have the power then to invite us to grasp onto them. And so we just watch them. So this is Gyatro Rinpoche's commentary on these 4 points. Again, just going back to the mind, once you recognize that all appearances are of the mind, there is a tendency to reify the mind. To counteract that, you must further investigate the nature of the mind And by so doing, you will find that the mind that seems so real is in fact empty. It is empty of any essence. It is empty of any intrinsic nature. However, it is not merely a void. As you continue to investigate, you will find that the emptiness of the mind itself is naturally spontaneous. From that emptiness, all appearances spontaneously arise. What exactly is meant by this natural spontaneity? Investigate, and you will find that the very meaning of spontaneity is self-liberation. So, spontaneous arising, spontaneous release. Here's the sequence: from mind to emptiness, to spontaneous actualization, to self-liberation. Where is all of this taking place? In our own ordinary consciousness. This is Mahamudra, the union of Shamata and Vipassana. So this emptiness is not a mere absence, but it is the ground, the absolute space from which all appearances, all phenomena arise. And including in Dzogchen theory and in what is becoming a more and more tenable position, you could say, at the leading edge of physics, is that all physical reality itself is a product of this absolute space of the mind. And so this absolute space of the mind in Dzogchen is called the ground. So let's explore the nature of this ground. Dujam Lengpa writes, again in his text, "The foolish dharma of an idiot clothed in mud and feathers," in a particular section in which Padmasambhava, in his wrathful manifestation as Dorje Drolo, comes to him because Dujam Lengpa has reached a point where he is experiencing long periods of resting in pristine awareness, but he is still susceptible to mental afflictions occasionally. And so the Orgyen Dorje Drolo sings this beautiful long song in verse to him and gives him 3 practices in order to stabilize in Rigpa. And these are 3 Vipassana practices. And so the first of these is called seeking out the source of names, which I described earlier. You basically you examine whether you can find the object of designation, what you are designating. Can you find that in the basis of designation? And you discover that not only can you not find the object or that you are designating in the bases of designation, but that the bases of designation are themselves empty. They are not inherently a basis of designation for this object. So you recognize that it is conceptual designation that creates the object. I conceptually project an identity onto a particular basis of designation, but it could be a different basis of designation. And this basis of designation could be a different object for another being, for instance, projecting another object onto that basis. And then the second practice that he gives him is the very simple and powerful practice called destroy grasping to the permanence of things. And then Padmasambhava points out that, or it's actually in his commentary, Dujam Lingpa points out that in this practice, and the reason it's so powerful, is that it is an emptiness practice. And so anything that is inherently existent must be unchanging. It must be permanent. Because if it is changing due to causes and conditions and influences from outside. So if it has a stable, permanent identity, it should be unchanging. And so you destroy grasping to the permanence of things by simply watching impermanence at work. And again, your shamatha practice, with the power of close observation, is able to give you the observational skill and acuity to watch impermanence, to watch things changing moment to moment to moment. And so you realize that these things are not inherently existent, but are moment-to-moment creations. So that these first two then are ways of destroyed grasping and reification of external appearances. And then this third one then gets into the ultimate nature of the ground. And so this is Padmasambhava's advice to Dujam Lingpa. And this is called Collapse the False Cave. Know that the conceptualized self that is grasped as I, and all its aspects that are established as the external physical world and its internal sentient inhabitants, are arising within the expanse of the all-pervasive essential nature of the mind, devoid of a center and a periphery. Samsara and nirvana are wholly present as your own perceptions, and they are wholly included within the expanse of the essential nature. This essential nature is called the ground. So the ground is the essential nature of reality and of the mind, from which all of samsara and nirvana arise. And then in another section on the ground, Dujam Lingpa continues, the essential nature of the ground is like the essential nature of space, which is not transformed by the day and night, does not turn into anything else, and enables the appearances of light and darkness. The reflection of the planets and stars in the ocean are none other than the ocean. The physical world and its sentient inhabitants are none other than space. Samsara and nirvana are none other than displays of ultimate reality. So this is what we are moving towards, a realization that all of these appearances are mind is empty, and then all of these displays of appearances are actually displays of the ground, which is mind, the ultimate nature of mind. And then in another section, Dujam Lingpa writes, the unaware aspect of the ground is called the substrate, and its pure aspect is called the Dharmakaya. Due to its being exhausted in the darkness of unawareness, this very primordial ground, like space which enables all appearances to arise, is the substrate. The appearing aspect of dualistic conceptualization manifests as the delusive appearances of the three realms. So this is the aspect of the ground. There is one ground, not two, but this one ground has two aspects. And one is the unaware aspect of substrate, and the other is the aware aspect of Dharmakaya. And So the unaware aspect of the ground, or all appearances that begin basically in unawareness, then become appearances of samsara, or appearances to sentient beings. And this is really what defines a sentient being, is the sentient being is perceiving this type of appearance of reality. But then in another section, Dujam Lingpa continues, telling us about one of his visions, a visit from a Dakini who gives him some advice. Then after 3 years had passed, in a dream, a young woman placed 13 white mustard seeds on a bright, clear mirror and said, "Do not regard the mind and pristine awareness as two grounds. Do not mistake pristine awareness for the mind. The mind refers to something projected by pristine awareness. The night does not occur during the daytime, and the day does not occur during the nighttime. Space does not turn into either one. Distinguish between the mind and pristine awareness in this way. Then all my earlier ways of grasping naturally faded away, and I came to rest in the great spontaneous vastness of the originally pure ground of being. All things that arose as its creative expressions naturally released themselves in their own expanse. This essential nature, together with its creative expressions, which are free of modification, antidote, meditation practice, memory, grasping, and identification, is called path pristine awareness." And then just continuing again with the words of these great beings, this now is from Samantabhadra himself in the text, The Enlightened View of Samantabhadra. "O son of the family, no sentient being is ever separated, even for an instant, from the primordial great perfection of the sublime qualities of the ground. Nevertheless, just as water that naturally flows freely, freezes and becomes hard, so do sentient beings cling to the three realms of samsara and become deluded, without the ground ever experiencing either harm or benefit. So the ground is like water. Sentient beings are crystallized water, frozen water. But that doesn't mean they aren't water. So they are never separated from the ground, even for an instant. But we cling to this frozen crystallization of the ground as being truly existent. And so this gives rise to all of our suffering of samsara. But the ground itself is completely unaffected. Water remains water, even though it is now, for us as sentient beings, a crystallized form of water. We have become snowflakes rather than liquid flowing water. And then Samantabhadra continues, "O son of the family, this very ground is said to be of the nature of the 5 facets of primordial consciousness. It is like this. The primordial consciousness of the absolute space of phenomena is so called because all phenomena are naturally present in all pervasive absolute space, the essential nature of which is primordially empty." So the essential nature of all appearances is empty space. And then he continues, or in another section, I have edited together several selections from different parts of the text. By determining the nature of all dualistic appearances, you will come to the definite conclusion that their essential nature is empty and non-objective, a great openness. Their non-objective, empty, essential nature is the ground. By recognizing the ground, you will know how all of samsara and nirvana is none other than the ground of being. So all of the appearances of samsara and nirvana, all appearances of virtue and non-virtue, all of suffering, all of appearances of liberation, all of these are appearances from this one ground. And this ground allows or enables all appearances to arise in the same way that a clear mirror allows appearances to rise, even though these appearances do not become part of the surface of the mirror. So we hear throughout the whole spectrum of Buddhist teachings that about this ocean of samsara, or samsara is suffering, and we resolve to free ourselves of this ocean of samsara and become free. So it seems like the whole goal then is of that samsara is somehow a very difficult problem for us, and liberation is something that we need to achieve in order to be free from this suffering, and that they are vastly different. And that naturally we prefer liberation to the suffering of samsara. So over and over again we hear this. So is what Dujam Lingpa and Samantabhadra, Padmasambhava, what all of these great beings of the Dzogchen tradition, does this somehow contradict this very core idea that samsara is something that we need to become liberated from? And when it says that all appearances of samsara and nirvana are equally pure. Well, the important point to recognize in this is that from the vantage point or from the perspective of a sentient being, definitely liberation is preferred to suffering of samsara. But that is because the vantage point of a sentient being is diluted and can't see ultimate reality. And so the important point to realize is that there is only one perspective from which this is actually true, that you could say all of samsara and nirvana are equally pure appearances. And that is from the fully awakened point of view of a Buddha or a Vijayadatta resting in pristine awareness. So from the point of view of pristine awareness, all displays are equally pure displays of mind which is empty, the absolute space of phenomena, which is the ground of all appearances. Samsara, nirvana, all equally pure. And so there is nothing to prefer one appearance over another, because all of them are displays of pure mind. But of course, from the vantage point of a sentient being, sentient beings unable to see this particular view, this is still something that we aspire to as being something other than what I am. And this is one thing that we cut through also when we cut through to pristine awareness, is the identification of being a sentient being on the path. And so when we cut through to pristine awareness, this is part of the baggage of being a sentient being, of being a deluded, dualistic, sentient being inhabiting the three realms, and who is trying to achieve freedom, this is exactly, becomes one of the most subtle identifications that we cut through then, when we cut through to pristine awareness, and truly then recognize the ground of non-dual luminosity and emptiness. So Dujam Lingpa and all of Dzogchen and Mahamudra state that all of these appearances, the ultimate nature of all appearances, and all appearances of the physical world as well, are all crystallizations of space, are all temporary crystallizations of the empty space of absolute space. And this actually also corresponds very, very closely to the contemporary ideas of physics, and especially a field called quantum field theory. So and quantum cosmology. So in quantum cosmology, it is, again, the view is that matter is a temporary crystallization of space. And in the modern view of physics is that space is not our cartoon image of an empty vacuum, of just a nothingness. So I think for most of us, we have an image of space, of deep, deep, deep space between galaxies as being a featureless, empty void that is black with nothing. It can be for us our definition of nothingness. Just like standing on the edge of the ocean and looking out over the Atlantic or looking over the Pacific, that becomes, an image of infinity. Looking into deep space can be our image of nothingness. What's out there? Absolutely nothing. No dust particles, nothing, it seems. But is that true? So modern physics actually says that it's impossible, that the world could not exist if space existed in that way. And that space actually, even what is even a theoretical vacuum, is not empty, but it is filled. It is just brimming, fizzing with energy. And this is called, in fact, the Casimir effect. And Lama Allen became very fascinated by this correspondence. And so while he was at Amherst College studying physics and mathematics, he was able to get a tutor from Harvard University, a physicist who was on leave and teaching at Amherst, to give him private tutorials for an entire semester on doing the mathematics of what is called the zero-point energy of the vacuum. And so he was able to do then all of the mathematics, of which, let's just say, it fills about 4 pages of equations. He was able to do all of that and find, see the coherence of the entire equation. And the very fundamental point of that, which is very well known and cited all over throughout physics, is that the zero-point energy of the vacuum, when you end up at the end of the equation, is infinite. So instead of this vacuum being empty, a nothingness, physics, the view of physics, is that there is an infinite energy that is permeating this space, and it is an electromagnetic energy. And again, there are other things like dark energy and dark matter that come to mind also. Some 95% of the universe, it's said in recent theories, is unknown to us right now. as either some form of energy that is unknown to us or some form of matter that we have no way of knowing right now. So it's just called dark because we don't have any way of observing it yet, but mathematically it is required in order for this universe to exist and not to just explode into individual elementary particles. So there is something, physics and Dzogchen, again, are converging on this point. So if you tell somebody this, that all of matter, all of physical appearances, all appearances are just temporary crystallizations of space, you don't have to be embarrassed and think that this is somehow a Tibetan mythology. This is the highest wisdom of two different worldviews that is converging. One that was arrived at through the first-person experience of introspection. The other that was arrived at through very rigorous observation and third-person observation and this very rarefied mathematics. So two very different perspectives, two very different approaches, one Eastern, one Western, converging and beginning to give a very similar picture of the universe. As the physicist Henning Gentz put it, real systems are, in this sense, quote, excitations of the vacuum, much as surface waves in a pond are excitations of the pond's water. I wonder if he knows Dzogchen. So isn't this interesting that it would use the same metaphor even? So the vacuum itself is shapeless, but it may assume specific shapes. In doing so, it becomes a physical reality, a, quote, real world. When practicing our Shamata practice of simultaneous stillness and motion, the key to maintaining this stillness is radical impartiality. And so your still awareness is going to be set in motion when it grasps to one of these appearances as something other than mind, as something other than an appearance of mind. And so what happens at that point is that the spaciousness of awareness shrinks to the size of the object that is apprehended because we forget the full context of what is happening. This is only a dream appearance arising within the vast space of the ground. We forget that, and this becomes a real appearance to us in which we become absorbed and by which we are fascinated. And because we are fascinated with this so-called external object then, we grasp onto it. If it's pleasant, we want to keep it because it becomes a source of my happiness. And if it is somehow unpleasant, we push it away, resist it, and feel an aversion for it because we feel this truly existent object is a cause of my unhappiness. So this is the basic delusion. We forget that these are all temporary crystallizations of space. And so to remain still, the key is radical impartiality. And the highest expression of that radical impartiality is that we see all appearances as equally pure displays of the ground itself. So we can have a facsimile of that anyway. We can know that conceptually. And that's very, very helpful. And so if we know that conceptually, then these appearances that arise don't have the power to attract us away from the stillness of awareness. And so our awareness remains still, And then we watch the entire life cycle of a mental appearance. It has arisen, it's present for some time, and then we watch it self-release back into the ground. And this spontaneous self-release is described in the Tantra of the blazing clear expanse of the Dakinis as the meaning of self-release of signs is like water merging into water. All phenomena that appear as real signs are nothing other than reality itself. For example, once bubbles have arisen, they dissolve back into the water. Likewise, all phenomena arise from reality itself. Then all phenomena are released in their own states, in their own state. And the Nyingma Lama Sogyo Rinpoche advised, just as the ocean has waves or the sun has rays, so the mind's own radiance is its thoughts and emotions. The ocean has waves, yet the ocean is not particularly disturbed by them. The waves are the very nature of the ocean. Waves will arise, but where do they go? Back into the ocean. And where do the waves come from? The ocean. In the same manner, thoughts and emotions are the radiance and expressions of the very nature of the mind. They rise from the mind, but where do they dissolve? Back into the mind. Whatever arises, do not see it as a particular problem. If you do not impulsively react, if you are only patient, it will once again settle into its essential nature. And then this very helpful advice, again from the Tantra of the blazing clear expanse of the Dakinis. In the early phases of the practice, your mind is overwhelmed by layers of ideation. Sound familiar? There are so many thoughts that you can't possibly recognize all of them. But step by step, through engaging in the practice, you refine your awareness so that the moment they arise, you recognize them and simultaneously see their nature. So this really gives a new meaning then to simultaneous stillness and motion. The simultaneously recognize not only the movement of the appearance, the arising of an appearance, but you simultaneously, as it arises, recognize its nature. And then when we are able to do that, when we are resting in this simultaneous stillness and motion in which all appearances arise, we see their nature in the moment they arise. We are doing our very best facsimile, very close now, getting closer and closer and closer in our approximation of the non-abiding nirvana of a Buddha. The stillness of our awareness, basically just resting in the ground of awareness, is nirvana, our facsimile of nirvana. And then all of the appearances that arise are appearances, you could say, of samsara, but not of samsara, but they are in the same way that a Buddha is able to not be drawn into samsara, even though he is aware of the appearances of samsara to me and to perhaps you. The Buddha knows my experience of samsara, even though he is resting in this omniscient state of peace, of equanimity, of nirvana. So he is resting in nirvana, but it is a non-abiding nirvana. He does not say, "You sentient beings, don't trouble me with your problems." The Buddha is aware of it, and because it was compassion that led him along the path to omniscience in the first place, great compassion and bodhicitta, he is moved by this bodhicitta to not remain in the peace of nirvana, but to emanate spontaneously, to be of benefit in whatever way he can to sentient beings. So when we come back after our break, we will do our best approximation of non-abiding nirvana, simultaneous stillness and motion, and putting all four of these points of Wangchuk Dorje into practice as a Shamata practice, or the integration of Vipassana and Shamata. So let's come back at 10:48. We'll do this practice. Begin, as always, by settling the body in its natural state. By first releasing tension, constriction, even pain, wherever you discover it in the body. Let your breath be drawn to it, and then release it on the exhalation into space. The ultimate natural state of the body is nirmanakaya. Here, as a preliminary to that, release all identification with this body being my body of a sentient being. Release the conceptual knowing of this body as being likable or unlikable, as a visual image that we see in the mirror or a photograph. And simply experience the body non-conceptually as tactile sensations, Shantideva said, surrendering everything at once is nirvana. So what is it you are surrendering? Your conceptual identification with being the body, speech, and mind of a sentient being. So with this deep relaxation and profound ease of the natural state of the body, settle the speech in its natural state. The natural state of speech, ultimately, is Sambhogakaya. But in the absence of identification to all of the chattering noise that fills our minds, discover the effortless silence of the natural state of speech as a preliminary. And then settle the mind in its natural state. The ultimate natural state of the mind is Dharmakaya. So in this preliminary practice of settling the mind in its natural state, settle the mind in its spacious, luminous, non-conceptual state of awareness. This is the awareness that illuminates appearances but does not become them. And so as you are resting in this still, spacious awareness, appearances are bound to arise. And in this practice, we have no preference over stillness, we have no preference of stillness over motion. We do not prefer Shamata with no appearances. So let these appearances arise in their natural flow. And let these appearances arise to your still awareness within the space of awareness. So as they arise, first of all, recognize the difference between the stillness of your awareness and the movement of these mental appearances. You might actually recognize this movement of an appearance as the crystallization of space. And as you continue to rest in stillness of awareness, try to have a simultaneous experience of stillness and motion. Remain aware of the stillness of awareness while you are aware of these appearances arising within that space of stillness. Your still awareness is set in motion by grasping to one of these appearances. The space shrinks to the size of the appearance, and it's all that exists. And you go wandering with it. The key to maintaining stillness is the radical impartiality of seeing these appearances for what they are. These are not appearances of something that will be a cause of your happiness or unhappiness. These are simply mental appearances. These appearances are mind itself. And along with objective appearances of thoughts, images, memories that appear to this still awareness, there are also subjective appearances. An appearance of me, the subject, viewing appearances. Let this still awareness know those as well, those very subtle appearances. Of me, the observer, me, the mind, observing these appearances as they arise. Can you see that me also? The agent, the observer. Watch that also as just another mental appearance that changes, is produced by causes and conditions. What you discover as you are watching these appearances is that all appearances are mind, and mind itself is empty. As you watch these appearances, you can ask this appearance, where does it come from? And you can see it. You view it as a spontaneous actualization of space, the absolute space of phenomena, from which all appearances arise. This is simply a temporary crystallization of this space. And as you continue to watch it, without grasping to it, you watch it dissolve again. It self-releases. The crystallized space melts again, back into the space from which it arose. The wave was never other than water, and it returns to being only the water of the ocean. So simply rest in this still, spacious, awareness that vividly knows the nature of appearances in the instant that they arise.